Hello everyone, hope you all are doing well. In today's class, we're going to be discussing outsourcing, the different types of outsourcing, why businesses outsource, the advantages, the disadvantages, and common issues faced. So, let's get started today. The first term we're going to be discussing is the term outsourcing. So, by definition, the term outsourcing means using a third party business to undertake a part of the production process or business function that was previously performed internally using the firm's own employees. It is permanent or long term transfer of function, distinct from subcontracting, which is typically project specific and temporary. So, what we can determine from this is that basically outsourcing outsourcing means giving a function away to a third party business, right? Secondly, it also means that it replaces what was done by the company. And thirdly, it is permanent slash long term and not project specific like subcontracting. So basically, what happens in this scenario is that a specific thing done by a specific company is given to a third party which is not directly related to the company. It is done on a permanent basis, so the company A, which actually gives the work to the third party, does not have to perform that task again. An example of this is iPhone or Apple using Samsung as their screen providers. So all the screens made by iPhones are typically made for iPhones are typically made by Samsung. So Samsung creates the screens for Apple, and Apple then uses those screens in iPhones. All right. So this is outsourcing. Then, what exactly is subcontracting? Subcontracting is paying another firm to complete specific tasks or handle overflow production when the firm's own capacity is insufficient. This is typically shorter term and task specific rather than a permanent structural change. So basically, subcontracting is different from wait yeah, it is different from outsourcing in the sense that it is short term or task specific. Secondly, it is task specific. It can also be used for also to handle overflow production, meaning that if a company faces more demand than it previously did, more demand than it can handle, in that scenario, uh, subcontracting can also be done so that the extra level of production required can also be managed in that case. All right. And it is done when company's capacity is insufficient. All right. Next, offshoring. Offshoring means relocating a business function to another country, often to a business in a lower wage economy. Subset of outsourcing. It is a subset of outsourcing, and an example is customer service call centers relocated to countries with lower wage costs. So, this means that an entire function is moved slash relocated to a country with lower costs slash salaries, right? This is the entire thing, offshoring. Offshoring is basically moving to a country whose GDP, whose per capita income, whose labor costs are typically lower than where the company is originally situated. For example, if the average salary in Lithuania or Luxembourg, I think in Luxembourg, is 6,000 to 7,000 or $8,000, then the same labor that costs 6 to 7 to 8,000 in Luxembourg would cost the company like 1,000 or maximum 500 or $1,000 in another country in South Asia like Pakistan or Bangladesh or Myanmar or Burma, stuff like that. All right. So it would cost much lower. So the company moves its employees stuff that can be done by the company from overseas. It moves those functions over there, like the example of call centers. They do not need to be physically present in the United States or in Europe or in Africa or anywhere. They do not need a specific place, so it can be done from anywhere else. In that scenario, offshoring is done to lower the costs of employees. Why businesses outsource? Outsourcing decisions are typically driven by the logic of focusing on core competencies, doing what the business does best, and contracting out everything to specialists who can do it more cheaply, efficiently, or to a higher standard. Common functions outsourced include IT support and software development, payroll processing, customer service slash call center operations, facilities management and cleaning, logistics and distribution, marketing and advertising. So if any one of you has done, any internships in a big company, in a large company, you would note that the company seldom has their own janitors or their own security guards. They usually employ other companies to provide them cleaning services and provide them with janitors, provide them with cleaning staff, and provide them with security guards or anyone who can provide perimeter, patrolling and stuff like that. That is because the company, any company, other than the cleaning company itself or other than the security company, their core competencies do not involve cleaning or security, right? Their core competencies, for example, if they are an IT company, if they are a software company, their core competency would involve developing software, providing software services, you know providing after sales services. If it is a call center, their main core competency would be to provide call services. So in that scenario, the securities and the janitor and the cleaning services, they are not core competencies, and so those sort of things can be outsourced. Now, moving on, we'll discuss the advantages and disadvantages of outsourcing. So the first advantage of outsourcing is that it enables the business to focus management time and capital on core activities. So like we discussed before, it allows anything that does not focus on the core competencies of the business is just a waste of time of the management as well as the money that the company has, the capital the company has. All right. So one advantage is that it enables the business to focus management time and capital on core activities. The second benefit is that it allows access to specialist expertise without the cost of developing it in house. So, for example, if you were to hire a security guard, on the most basic level, we're going to discuss that. So if you were to hire a security guard, and if the security guard did not have much experience or anything of the sort, you would not know how to train that person, or if the person already did have experience, you would not know how to schedule his shift so that it would be the most secure and most safe for you. On that note, we can also discuss that, for example, Nvidia, which is one of the largest companies in the world, if not the largest company in the world, they do not make sometimes make their own semiconductor chips. The thing that has made Nvidia very very successful, right? They employ another company. They use another company which is TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, to make those semiconductor chips. So, because NVIDIA itself does not have that level of specialist expertise that TSMC has, NVIDIA chooses to pay TSMC that money, which is a lot of money, to make that sort of technology, to use their expertise to make that technology, right? So the next advantage is that it allows greater flexibility to the company, meaning a contract can be scaled up or down as demand changes. So one time I was working in a company, they wanted five security guards instead of three. So what they did was they just sent a request to the security company, and they were like, we need two more people, and the security company was like, all right, here's the amount of money that it would cost you, and we're going to send them tomorrow. And they paid the money, and the guys arrived tomorrow, the next day. And around 2 months later, they were like, we don't need 5 guys, we need 4 guys. So just kick one guy out. So instead of, firing that person and giving him severance or, an extra amount of money or the whole hassle, they just contacted the security company and they were like, we don't want one guy. So take him back. And they were like, okay, we'll take him back. And the next day, the guy did not come. And, just there were 4 people left. It allows greater flexibility in everything, in every different aspect. So you can, get more out of the contract or get less out of the contract as much as you desire. The next one is there are potential cost savings, meaning a specialist provider benefits from economies of scale. So, a company which is focused only on making a specific thing that we have outsourced. So, for example, if Nvidia, AMD, Intel, Dell, HP, they all buy from TSMC, right? So, TSMC has achieved economies of scale. It can make semiconductor chips which are very, very difficult to make on a good level. They're very difficult to make, and TSMC has achieved economies of scale, and they can do it very cheaply as opposed to other companies. So it allows TSMC to charge the other companies handsomely, and the other companies which buy from TSMC, they do not have to pay as much, because they do not have to pay as much as they would have to if they chose to manufacture the chips themselves. All right. Also, it reduces fixed costs, and previously permanent staff, which was at the factory or manufacturing unit or admin tasks, they are removed, and instead they are replaced by variable contract costs, which are linked directly to the outsourcing. And lastly, the third party specialist may perform the function better than the firm could. Again, the example of TSMC with regards to NVIDIA, NVIDIA being very, very successful, still cannot compete with the level of quality that TSMC produces. So the third party specialist that is based in Taiwan instead of the US, they perform that function better than NVIDIA does. All right. However, there are certain disadvantages that are associated with outsourcing. And the first one is that third party has access to sensitive commercial data, operational processes, or intellectual property. This could pose a security risk. So if you want a specific company to make custom things for you, custom designs for you, in that scenario, that party has to have access to sensitive data of your company, of your business. That can lead to a security risk. All right. The next one is that quality can be more difficult to monitor and control, and standards may slip because you do not own the third party manufacturer, you do not own the third party that you are contracting with. Their quality control checks may not be as strict or as you know thorough as your own businesses are, right? So in that scenario, it would mean that there is a chance that standards may fall if the third party does not keep up with whatever quality you want. All right. The next one is that uncertainty over delivery reliability and turnaround times. This means that there can be a breakdown at the plant of the other company, the other third party. There can be an issue with the delivery company, the delivery, whatever it is, anything to do with manufacturing time, lead time, and delivery time. All those things are uncertain, and they can sometimes cause certain delays which could disrupt the entire supply chain. So that is an issue, that can be an issue. And the next one is that difficult and expensive to reverse. Lock-in period may develop as internal capability is lost. So, for example, if you permanently remove one sort of function from your business. So, for example, if Nvidia were to remove the entire semiconductor division, and one day TSMC might wake up and be like, "We do not want to continue our contract with you." In that scenario, Nvidia may have a lock-in period where they have lost their internal capability to make that thing, because they may not have the equipment, they may not have the people, they may not have the software, they may not have the planning to go with that. So in that case, it is difficult and expensive to reverse permanently outsourcing one piece of business that you currently have. The next one is that job losses within the business may cause damage to remaining employee morale. So, for example, recently, some of you might have heard that Oracle, which is also a huge software company, they recently fired 30,000 employees, many pertaining to, I think, India, and the rest of the world. And that sent shockwaves across the whole world, across the entire industry. And it signaled that companies as huge as Oracle, which had record profits that year, they fired people. And the job losses, they demotivated a lot of employees, and there were reports that a large number of employees started to look for other roles while still being in Oracle, because they did not have trust in the company. They lost their morale. So if you outsource a division, if you outsource a part of the business, in that scenario you can face that, meaning that the remaining employees might have lower morale than they used to have before, and that can damage the business itself. The next one is that contractual disputes and coordination costs can erode the financial benefit. So if is a certain dispute, or if there are difference in coordination between the two companies. So again, Nvidia and TSMC, Taiwan is certainly on the other side of the globe, and the US is on the other side of the globe. In that scenario, there is a huge time zone difference. There is a difference of everything, basically, from the culture, from the workings, from the supply chain, from the people, from the management, from the leadership, from the labor, from every from the weather, from everything. So the coordination can be difficult. And if an issue regarding the contract was to arise, that can also erode, that can also mitigate the financial benefit that a business would be getting from outsourcing a part of a division, or a division itself. All right. So these are the advantages and disadvantages of outsourcing. And moving on, we will now discuss subcontracting versus outsourcing, and what are the key distinctions between both. So subcontracting basically is task specific, meaning a builder subcontracts electrical work on one project, whereas outsourcing means it is function based. The entire IT department is permanently managed externally. So, if it was task specific, and if it related to the IT department, it could be that develop one part of the entire software, and just give the rest back to us. However, in outsourcing, the entire IT department is permanently managed externally. So, a third party manages the entire department. Whereas in subcontracting, you give just one part to another third party. Subcontracting is also temporary, meaning the relationship ends when the project or overflow period ends. Whereas outsourcing is long term, and the third party takes ongoing responsibility for the function. All right. So it is continuously ongoing, and whereas subcontracting is just temporary or one time. Subcontracting is used to manage capacity peaks. It is not a structural business change, whereas outsourcing is a strategic structural decision. It changes how the business is organized. So, subcontracting is, for a short period of time. It is for an emergency. It is for, a little bit of ease. Whereas outsourcing is an actual deliberate decision taken by the top level management to, change the structural design of the company, of the business, and it changes how the business is organized. And subcontracting basically means that firm retains internal capability for the task, like I said, just needs extra help. Whereas in outsourcing, the firm's internal capability for the function is often reduced or eliminated. Internal capability meaning that if there was a division and they were developing software, and they wanted that a specific person or a specific third party would, do XYZ stuff for that software, they would, use subcontracting, and they would still retain a lot of the people, a lot of the minds, that you were used to develop that software. Whereas if it was outsourcing, they would just not hire any IT person, they would not hire any software engineer or computer science major, they would not hire any of those, and they would be like, these are our requirements, we want you to fulfill the entire requirements and get back to us." So the third party would design the entire the entire software itself, right? So these were the differences between subcontracting and outsourcing. Again, there are specific issues with offshoring. and there are also certain benefits, so let's discuss those. The benefits of offshoring are that it allows access to significantly lower wage economies, meaning the labor costs are significantly reduced and the operating costs subsequently are significantly reduced. It can allow a business access to global talent pools where specialist skills may be more available. So there is a thing going on that, if a company in the US pays, one person around uh, 10 to, $15,000, 15 to $20,000 actually, for a good software engineer. They can pay a good software engineer in Pakistan, India, Bangladesh around $3 to $5,000. They'll be happy, and they will be on the same level, if not better, for the same price. So this means that the company or the business can access global talent pools for a lower amount of money, and they can, access specialist skills, and they may be available more for the company. Furthermore, it avoids domestic trade barriers or tariffs by producing within the target market. So, for example, Trump some time ago announced tariffs for companies, exporting to certain countries from America, right, from the US. However, if a company if there was a trade tariff imposed on China, which was a huge tariff, so if a company had outsourced its, product to China, they would not be part of that tariff. They would not have that tariff be imposed on them because the product itself was being produced in China. The profits were flowing to the company in the US, but the entire business division was in China. So, they can overcome that trade barrier or that tariff by, just producing in the target market. A prime example of this is Tesla, the car company. Tesla has a huge project in, I think, China, and they produce a lot of cars there. So if Teslas were being sold in, China, and the US had placed a huge tariff on electric cars, so in that scenario, cars being produced in China would not have been taxed, would not have been subject to those tariffs because the cars themselves are being produced in China. All right. So the next benefit of offshoring is that potential tax advantages in certain offshore jurisdictions. So there are some countries like the UAE, Dubai, the Abu Dhabi, and in those places the income taxes are basically very low or zero. These include, I think, Jersey, which is near the UK. I think it includes, Dubai. It also includes some islands near the US, where, the tax rates are really, really low. So it can be, the tax costs can be overcome by registering the company there, by offshoring to those certain jurisdictions. Also, it supports global expansion strategy, which means that the company or the business can build presence in new geographic markets. So if when Tesla set up a plant in China, they built their presence there in a new geographic market, and they established themselves there, and they started to compete with the local, you know uh, EV makers, electric vehicle makers, right? So it supported Tesla's own global expansion strategy. However, there are also a few problems with offshoring, and the first one is that there are language and cultural barriers which can cause communication problems and errors. All right, so that was a given. The second one is that there can be different customer tastes and cultural expectations requiring careful product adaptation. So, for example, the most basic example for this that I can think of is of tea. The drink tea in Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. I think Bangladesh is a bit different. In Pakistan and India, a certain sort of tea leaf is preferred, right? However, that same brand is not preferred in Australia. It is not preferred in the UK. It is not preferred in the US. So in the UK, they prefer variants like Earl Grey, or that's the only one I know of, to be very honest. However, the variants there of the same thing, which is tea, they are different. So there are differing consumer tastes for the same exact thing. They make the same thing, and they make tea in the same exact manner, using tea leaves. However, the difference is that certain variants or certain, differences make it difficult for the business to adapt to the culture, the cultural expectations or the consumer tastes. All right. The next problem with offshoring is that the level of service concerns, meaning the time zone differences and remote management, can reduce quality. So, for example, if again, like I said, NVIDIA and if Taiwan were to, TSMC were to work together, and NVIDIA wanted continuous monitoring, continuous management of the staff working in Taiwan, it would be very difficult because the main hours, the sunlight hours for Taiwan, are very different than that for the US. All right. So in that scenario, the US would have to, offshore, would either have to, send people to Taiwan or hire people in Taiwan, or keep ask their own managers situated in the US to stay up late and monitor their staff in Taiwan remotely. So all of those things, can cause a certain level of quality question mark. They can reduce quality, they can, may cause a problem for the entire company. So there are such concerns. The next one is that supply chain concerns. There is a loss of quality control and delivery reliability in overseas plants. Like I just said, these are basically the same thing, just addressing different parts. So the first one talks about the management. The second one talks about the supply chain. The entire supply chain, meaning it goes from quality control and delivery reliability. And the last one is that there can be ethical and reputational risk if labor standards in the offshore country are poor. So there have been multiple scandals over the years where where different companies with huge businesses are, accused of child labor, where they are accused of, paying pennies on the dollar to make the same thing. So for running sweatshops, these include brands like Nike and Adidas, and these brands, face heavy scrutiny. They face heavy reputational risk. Very, there are very large scandals that have been made in the past due to these things. So businesses have to be very careful. All right. So these were the offshoring benefits and problems. So let's move on to the last part of this lecture, and we will talk about common misconceptions. Students often use subcontracting and outsourcing interchangeably, meaning they confuse them for the same thing. They are related, but they are distinct. Subcontracting transfers a specific task, you know, a specific task temporarily. An example is a builder hiring an electrician for one project. All right. So it is not that a builder is hiring a whole team to build multiple houses. It is the builder is just hiring one person, one electrician for just doing the wiring inside the house, for example. Whereas outsourcing transfers an entire business function long term. Meaning, an example would be the firm hiring an external IT management company permanently and disbanding its internal IT team, meaning the company would not retain internal capabilities to do the same exact thing, like we discussed before. Outsourcing does not always reduce costs. If the firm loses control of quality, or incurs contract management costs, or ends up locked into a poor supplier relationship, the total cost can exceed what the function cost internally. So if these problems were to arise, the cost that has to be incurred to rectify that would be much larger than the cost that took to just do that function internally. So you need to evaluate both sides quite carefully. An exam tip is that questions about outsourcing almost always require an analysis of both advantages and disadvantages, and often ask you to evaluate whether outsourcing is appropriate for a specific business. So, what you need to do is that you need to frame your answer around the first thing is core versus non core activities. So, if it's an IT company and they are talking about, for example, again, cleaning services, it is a non core activity, it is not the core activity of the business. The second one is that there can be cost versus control trade off. So, this means that you have to discuss whether the cost incurred is much higher than, if you were to lose control of the product. So, if you don't mind incurring that cost versus, losing control of the business, you should, just transfer control, you should just outsource it. But if you prefer control over the business, if you prefer control over the division or that specific process, then you need to incur the cost and not perform that trade off. The third one is that you need to discuss quality and reliability risk, that you need to discuss whether if things were to go sideways, if things were to cause an issue, then what can you do about it. The fourth one is strategic flexibility, and the fifth one is employee relations impact. What would employees think when a certain level of employees, when certain level of their friends, their co-workers would be laid off, would be fired because of offshoring. All right, so you need to discuss all those things. And this is an exam style question, which is just a small question. Discuss the impact of outsourcing on a business, 12 marks. And this is the mark scheme guidance that you can use to write a good answer. You can pause the video and perform that. So I hope this was helpful. I hope that by using different examples, I was able to convey what this entire thing means, and the difference between outsourcing and subcontracting. All right. So I hope this was helpful. Let me know if you want any other topic, if you want any other thing that you need to understand, if you want that to be discussed. So I'll see you in the next class. Take care. Goodbye.